Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Today, it's all about the quarterbacks. Russell Wilson headed to the Steel City. Will he be able to turn back the clock for the black and gold? Also, Kirk Cousins has said he wants to test the waters in free agency, and those waters are apparently not in the land of 10,000 lakes. Plus, the Bucs join the Steelers in a quarterback signing frenzy. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Yinzer country, let's ride. Russell Wilson is going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. We found out in one of the big surprises of free agency, just 12 hours before free agency, the tampering period was set to open. We got the reports. Russell Wilson is going to Pittsburgh. Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers, always ready for Yinzer country. And Chris, this was something you and I speculated about last week, talked about the possibility of Russell Wilson. There was the reported mutual interest. That reported mutual interest has been consummated. So what do you think of the fit here?
So the biggest thing that I was concerned about with the Steelers was, were they concerned about the stories we had heard from, times with Russell's times with the Seahawks and the Broncos, and would he be a dividing force in the Steelers locker room, which is why they wanted to meet with him. And, all reports indicated Friday that meeting went very well. It lasted several hours and they grew from it. And what we were hearing was after that meeting was that the mutual interest only intensified. Russell Wilson wants to go to a team that might be able to compete. The Steelers want a quarterback who can kind of hold the line and do what, manage a game the way an NFL quarterback should. And Russell Wilson can do that right now. Like, I don't think anyone's expecting Russell Wilson to come to Pittsburgh and be a star quarterback. That's not what he's going to be. But
does Russ know that, though?
That's the question, Peter. That's the question. Does he understand his role? And I have to think that when he sat down with Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith, it's like, look, buddy, this team has T.J. Watt. This team has Micah Fitzpatrick, Joey Porter Jr. Like this defense was sixth in the NFL in scoring last year. This offense is going to be better than it was with Matt Canada, offensive coordinator. But you are not the star of this show. The offensive line is going to be the bigger star of this show. I think Najee Harris, Jalen Warren is a 1-2 punch. Yeah. That's going to be the focus of this offense. If anything, this whole thing is, you saw what Ryan Tannehill did in his 2 years with Arthur Smith when he was in Tennessee. That's what Russell Wilson has a chance to do with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's what he has to embrace. If he tries to do more than that, that's where this can go very sour very quickly.
And you have to think, if there's going to be a head coach in the NFL who's going to be able to communicate this to his player in a way that the player is going to receive it in a positive way, it's got to be Mike Tomlin, right? Like, this is, if you're going to match, okay, there's been some issues, coaching, players, culture. Mike Tomlin is going to make sure that part of this is handled. And that way, this is a perfect marriage from a Russell Wilson standpoint of saying, hey, this guy is going to come and get the best out of you.
Exactly. Mike Tomlin's a guy who he manages maybe his best skill is managing players, is talking to them, is communicating to them, getting them on the same page that he needs them to be on. I mean, let's face it. Antonio Brown for 9 years was a superstar for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then everywhere else he went, in a year or less, he was just not there anymore. That's who Mike Tomlin is. You look at what he's doing with George Pickens, who was obviously having some troubles early in the middle of the season. And then in the last 3 games, you see him turn around. He's blocking. He's doing all the little things that a wide receiver should. That's where I think, and I don't think Russell Wilson's near the level of Antonio Brown or even a George Pickens. I think he's a different guy in and of himself. I think Mike Tomlin's going to communicate him to, hey, buddy, Russell, you want a chance to win? Guess what? This defense has been winning. I think 90% of the Steelers' wins over the last 3 seasons have come when they've held teams to 20 points or less. So all you have to do is score more than that most games, and you're part of a winning team. Last year, they were 10-2 when Mitch Trubisky did not take the field. That's that's what the Steelers are like. Look, buddy, we're not asking too much of you.
Just don't be Mitch Trubisky is a pretty low bar.
Exactly. That's my point here is that if Russell Wilson can embrace that and say, hey, I just got to make the smart reads. I don't need to be the hero. I can make the smart decisions. That's what the Steelers need. That's what Arthur Smith wants. That's what Mike Tomlin wants. And that's what this team's going to go into want. And I think it takes the pressure off this team for having to scramble for a Justin Fields and trade draft, a second round draft pick, or trying to trade up to get JJ McCarthy or all these other things that they're rumored to people are saying, oh, they should do this, they should do that. Russell Wilson gives them the option. And I think it also gives Kenny Pickett a time to say, like, hey, buddy, you weren't cutting it. Watch this guy who's been a 9-time Pro Bowler. If Russell Wilson stinks, they'll say, all right, Kenny, here's your next shot. Right. But I think this is the chance for Kenny Pickett to reevaluate, for Russell Wilson to get a chance to clear his name and say, hey, what was going on in Denver wasn't about me. And it's a chance for the Steelers to say, we have a veteran quarterback who's not going to lose the game for us and let us play the way that we want to play with our defense and our running game. If Russell Wilson fits that, I think the Steelers are an interestingly competitive team in 2024.
Stay up to date all year on the Pittsburgh Steelers by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Steelers on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Steelers will not be signing Kirk Cousins, but it also sounds like the Vikings won't be either. Before we get to that, the Heat lost to the Wizards? Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. You can also build live same-game parlays to juice those payouts. Gonzaga is in the semifinal of the WCC tournament facing San Francisco. The Zags took down the Dons in each of their regular season matchups, and FanDuel likes them by 8.5. FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot, people. FanDuel, official partner of the NBA and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. If you're a contender, you just can't lose to the Wizards. No one told the Heat. Miami gave the Wiz just their 7th road win all year.
He get the ball back with 12 seconds left. Duncan gets another shot attempt. He gets free for another three-pointer to win the game. Again, he misses. It bounces straight to Jimmy Butler, who has a chance to win the game with his own three-pointer. His misses off the back iron, and then time expires. That's it. I know it was a close game, David, but the Wizards had won 10 games all season going into this one. I don't think there's any debate. This is the worst loss of the season for Miami.
And the Eagles are saying goodbye to yet another legend. Fletcher Cox is calling it a career.
It is official. Number 91, Fletcher Cox, officially announces his retirement from the National Football League. I'm Gino Camilleri, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, here to tell you that Fletcher Cox, the longtime anchor, number 91 in the middle of the defensive line and number 1 in our hearts, hangs it up as a Philadelphia Eagle, drafted 12 years ago. In the last year of Andy Reid, he played for Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, hoisted a Lombardi trophy, played for Nick Sirianni, and he's going to get a gold jacket one day.
On the diamond, a potential NL Rookie of the Year candidate will miss the first 80 games of the season for testing positive for PEDs.
As Noelvi Marte is going to miss half the season. What's up? This is Jeff Carr from the Locked On Reds podcast. And the Cincinnati Reds will be without Noelvi Marte for 80 games as the potential Rookie of the Year candidate got a positive performance-enhancing drugs test. This is frustrating to me because he has so much talent. Power, speed, plays well at third base. Really thought that he was going to have a very nice season ahead of him. But now we won't see him till at least July.
The Kirk Cousins era, such as it is, may be coming to an end in Minnesota, with reports on Sunday night that Kirk Cousins is set to test the free agent market. Now, that does not mean the Minnesota Vikings are out of it, but usually when Kirk tests the market, He tests the market. Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings joins us now. And Luke, you have been preparing us for this moment. You have gone back and forth because we have gotten different reports and all kinds of stuff coming from the Cousins camp. And so now the Vikings, maybe they get to lean in more to the rebuild in the competitive rebuild part of this. Do you think it's fait accompli? It's done at this moment as we stand here? That he's out.
If I had to make a bet, I would say, yeah, he's out. He's going to go be a Falcon or maybe a Bronco if they come in hot. But where I understand it has been for a while, is that the Vikings have had their offer to Kirk Cousins. This is what we'll give you. We're not going to go up. We don't expect you to take less. This is what we'll give you. And if you want to go flirt around, if you want to go make some phone calls, see if you can do better, we're at peace with that. That's the understanding that I have right now. That's what's been reported at the Star Tribune, and that's, I think, the only thing that like makes it all make sense. And then you're gonna see a lot of negotiating through the media, I guess, of, hey, the Vikings are still definitely in it, Atlanta. Make sure that, you're not negotiating alone with, right. They might be. So if he's testing the market, if he hasn't taken Minnesota's deal, then that sort of does imply that there's something he thinks that's better that's out there. And once tampering opens, everybody's cards will be laid on the table and we'll see what the best offer truly is. So no, the Vikings are not out of it, but I don't think that they're going to be willing to come up in the bidding war, because it's not for Kirk. It's not about the average annual value anymore. It's not about he said it at the end of the season. It's not about the dollars. It's what the dollars represent. To me, translate that into, it's about guarantee structure. It's about commitment. Yeah. And the Vikings are willing to commit to a certain amount of time. If the Falcons are willing to commit to more time, he's a Falcon. And even if that's significantly less money, he'll still take that for the security of it. And the idea of, okay, if I'm going to be here for 3 years, I can buy a house. I can move my kids to this school district and not feel like I'm doing, like, that's important to him. So we'll see where he's at, but he's looking for security. And I don't know how much of that the Vikings are willing to give.
We talked the last time here on the Minnesota trade options in the draft if they got to move up, because it seems now likely that if they want to get one of the top 4 quarterbacks, they may have to move up to do that. What do you think the chances are, though, that they go out and they get the stopgap veteran X just to give them a little bit of a soft landing? Because we know that they're not just going to for sure blow out a trade package if they feel like they're getting fleeced on it.
Oh, for sure. And I think whether or not you land that quarterback, which you can't set your watch by that, right? You're going to want somebody with more experience than Jaron. You probably don't want to be a long-term starter, but if they have to keep the seat warm for 6 to 8 weeks while your rookie gets ready, you're good with that. But I don't see them, I wouldn't have really seen them being very serious for Baker Mayfield. I know he just went back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but that just never really made sense to me. That kind of quality of guy, you're sort of investing and committing to that guy. But there are quarterbacks out there that can play some games for you, but you don't have to commit to them. And I think that's probably the tier of the market they're going to be active in.
So if Kirk Cousins is not going to be the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings, how does that alter or adjust their plans in terms of how they want to be aggressive in spending and trades and those kinds of things in terms of roster building?
Yeah, well, so they've done a lot of the teardown part of the rebuild, but not a lot of the building part of the rebuild. They have changed over from the day Kwesi took over. I think there are 6 players that are still here. And one of them's Kirk, and that might not be true for very long. So we'll see what they want to do here. But in doing that, they've essentially have no commitments beyond 2024.
Stay up to date all year on the Minnesota Vikings by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Vikings on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Buccaneers are committing to Baker Mayfield. The Bucs have already made the 2 biggest signings of free agency, and free agency hasn't even started yet. First, it was Mike Evans coming back. Now it's Baker Mayfield on a 3-year deal worth $100 million. That is probably up to $100 million. $50 million in practical guarantees. James Yarko from Locked On Bucs joins me now. And James, there never seemed to be much question, at least in your mind, that this was going to get done, that Baker was going to be back here. Why was ultimately this the place where you think they settled?
As far as contract,
the price. I don't mean to say that they settled on Baker Mayfield. I mean in terms of what they decided, why this number made sense for them.
I think when you take a look at this deal and you realize that in reality, it can be a 2-year, $60 million deal, giving Baker essentially, $30 million a year average. You have 40 guaranteed in the first year, 20 in the second year. And that puts him basically barely in the top 10. Or I'm sorry, it puts him at 12 in terms of quarterback salary value, tied with Josh Allen, who is going to get a major deal and he's going to skyrocket up the rankings. And then Derek Carr, if he fulfills the entire contract, now you're looking at $33.3 million a year, puts him just inside the top 10 for now. So the way that these salaries are these days, and they're so inflated and they're so high, you think, wow, Baker Mayfield, $30 million a year, $33 million a year. That seems crazy. But in reality, you take a look at this contract starting even next year, and it's going to be one of those, if he lives up to the 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and only 10 interceptions in a playoff appearance, it's like, this is kind of a steal given the quarterback market.
Yeah, and you feel like these are moves that complement one another, right? You get Mike Evans in part because you feel like, okay, Baker, do you think either one of these moves make sense individually in terms of this is what they're paid? If you have Baker, but no Mike Evans, it seems like, well, you wouldn't want to do Baker.
Yeah, Mike Evans, that signing made sense no matter what. It doesn't. We've known that about Mike Evans since the start of his career. He gets 1,000. It doesn't matter if it's Mike Glennon or Josh McCown or Jameis Winston or Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's getting 1,000. But for Baker without Mike, I mean, granted, you still have Chris Godwin there, but they're struggling to find a number 3 wide receiver. Russell Gage has not lived up to the contract that he got. I expect him to be cut and save the Bucs $10 million. But, Chris Godwin and Devin Tompkins and Trey Palmer doesn't quite have the same ring to it as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins. So, Baker in a vacuum isn't quite the same as Baker with Mike and Chris and Rashad. But then, of course, you go back a couple of weeks and they hire Liam Cohen to be their offensive coordinator who coached Baker in Los Angeles. And even in the press conference, he's talking about, I'm excited to get back to work with Baker Mayfield potentially. And he had to almost correct himself. It's like, we've kind of known this was coming. So, this was always the plan. And the two biggest dominoes in Mike and Baker had to be the early ones to fall. And of course, Antoine Winfield Jr., you could throw that in as the third one, even if it is the franchise tag, but he would have been the number 1 safety on the market.
He certainly would have, and I think he's going to get a contract that reflects all of that. Where do they need to go from here, though? Because Devin White is a free agent. Levante David, they may have to totally remake this linebacker room, and the defense has not been the same since they won the Super Bowl. So where do they go now from here?
I think you're going to see Levante David return. I think that's something that both sides want to get done. I think Levante just saw what happened with Mike Evans and all of the Buck for Life branding. And that's something that's been important to Levante for a long time. He's not going to rule out anything, but he's even said on local radio in Tampa that he wants to retire a Buccaneer. So I think that gets done. And I think the writing has been on the wall for Devin White since about midway through the season. And Devin White is gone. He is going to hit free agency. He is not going to return to the Buccaneers. So now you're in a situation. Do you address inside linebacker? Do you roll with KJ Britt, who filled in for Devin White? You have Servassier Dennis that you drafted last year and didn't really get a ton of opportunity, was dealing with some injuries. But I think the Bucs are going to look to help the running back room somewhere in free agency. It may mean bringing back Chase Edmonds, but that's going to be one of the next moves that they need to make. They're going to try to get Levante David done. And then from there, there's still plenty of positions that need to be addressed. And really kind of the hot name right now in Tampa is a reunion with safety Jordan Whitehead, to bring him back after playing with the New York Jets, line him up with Antoine Winfield Jr. and really solidify the back end after a really disappointing year from Ryan Neal.
Stay up to date all year on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bucs on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And finally, Don't say bad things about the Pistons GM. Detroit's general manager Troy Weaver had an expletive-laced response to a heckling fan in the stands and pointed the man out to security at Little Caesars Arena. The heated exchange, video of which was, of course, shared on social media, occurred during Detroit's 142-124 loss to the Dallas Mavericks on Saturday night. The unidentified man can be heard saying, "You threatened me," saying to Weaver. Weaver had no comment on the incident. The craziest part of this is there were fans at this game? There were fans at a Pistons game? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, what should we expect from the big time conference tournaments this week? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on Sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.